They did it. They actually did it. They let us work with that over our heads and laid us off on our first day off. Those are the words of Senior Manager of Esports Operations Scott Parkin after delivering a weekend of esports events only for 83% of the department to be laid off when they returned. The 1,900 layoffs continue to roll out across Activision-Blizzard and the rest of Xbox. Both Blizzard and Activision staff have been betrayed by their leadership, asked to deliver their best work, while not even knowing if they'll have a job by the end of the day. And in some cases, that betrayal is literal because staff were given assurances that this wouldn't happen. And all of this is happening in the shadow of Xbox's first earnings report with Activision under its belt. The numbers are staggering in scope as Xbox benefit hugely from Activision's players and games, but as we look into the impact, we can see why Xbox management are looking at Activision staff as nothing more than lines on a spreadsheet. Now, usually this is where I'd make some segue joke, but no, I'll just be straight up with you. I'm asking for your help. Right now, ad rates on YouTube have continued to crater. We are getting quite a bit less, even though we're doing more work. To make our future be sustainable here and to support the job security and growth of our team, we've built Bellular.ghost.io. Essentially, our own platform. There you will find videos which go live before they're published here in YouTube, all of our detailed research reports on the stories that we cover, as well as loading screen, our daily newsletter. It truly means a lot to us, and you can find that link down below. Of course, my side of this bargain is that I'll be working as hard as I can to bring you better content, and that's not just a platitude. I'm actively planning our next steps for upgrades to this show. Okay, thank you for checking that out, and let's get into today's story. The headline is that Activision-Blizzard's esports department has been gutted with 83% of the team laid off, and this has happened 5 days after other staff were told. The impact here is fairly massive, and the public optics are so bad that it makes it clear just how this axe fell. Casters are hit, observer teams who are actually handling shots, honestly unsung heroes of esports productions, management, on-air talent, they are massive cuts. I hesitate to say most notably, but certainly you could say most visibly. Who has fronted, hosted a lot of stuff for the Overwatch League. Just a few days ago, January 23rd, she was on camera hosting the reveal of the new way that Overwatch esports would be done. And actually, it's a format that I think is way better and way more healthy. So she does that. This whole team is working in this. Of course, at that time, they don't know about the layoffs. None of them do. Then, just a few days later, we see the tweet. After 7 years of service, I've just been laid off by Blizzard. It was a dream job, and I'm saddened my time was cut short. That is, just in terms of optics, quite insane. And it really does show that this was just lines on a chart from far up above. And of course, the whole framing of the Overwatch Champion series, it already suggests that there was less of a spend commitment from Blizzard because a lot of it was being outsourced in terms of production and management to face it, right? So we did though think that the sort of familiar faces would be involved, especially because they did their video called The Future of Overwatch Esports, and that really gave the impression that these people would be sticking around, and that is not the case. Staff are lamenting here. They've spent their time and their energy building the replacement for the league, and then right as it's going to come into fruition, they're all thrown in the bin, or at least the majority of them are thrown in the bin. Here's Matt Morello. Unfortunately today, along with other amazing esports folks, I've been let go from Blizzard. He was casting. Here's Jess. I don't even have the words to express how angry I am right now. The observer teams for both Overwatch League and CDL did so much behind the scenes, and they've been cut. This is all brutal stuff, and it's not better for the Call of Duty League. That team just delivered, right? Its first major of the year in the past weekend, and this was done under the duress of not knowing if they would have jobs, because this all came out on Friday. Then in the weekend, they go and they deliver this event, and, then things definitely change. Here's just some important statements to read out. From the issues yesterday to the smoothness of today's show demonstrates just what rock stars we've been working with at the CDL, especially how we did it with zero reassurances we would still have jobs when we get back home, followed by They did it. They actually did it. They let us work with that over our heads and laid us off on our first day off. The lack of common decency is a joke. And it absolutely is. This is just callous, because the spreadsheet with those names will have been ready before the CDL LAN run from the 25th to the 28th. Staff were marked off as being, gone, but they weren't told. It's Activision squeezing that final bit of value before deciding to get rid of them. Now, of course, the work of these teams, though, will not be wasted. An unnamed source said that this is not the end of esports at Activision-Blizzard. Okay, they spoke to VentureBeat. Let's go through that. The esports business is not going away, but the company is being thoughtful about how to evolve to better deliver for players and fans. The source said that with a continued commitment to competitive esports, the company has landed on a model that more closely aligns with our game franchises, and the source said Activision-Blizzard is not stopping esports. Instead, it's adapting to a new business model to better serve the community. And overall, to be honest, looking at the new format for Overwatch, it does seem way better to me. It's all of that franchise, NFL style bollocks that Bobby was trying to do. That's gone, and it should be gone. It was not sustainable. It was not healthy, and it damaged Overwatch. So as much as that makes sense, just think about it here. These are people who had to work hard to sell a poisoned chalice. That's, I think, what the Overwatch League was, to morph that into a format that fans would actually like. So the reward these people got for shepherding these esports into the future away from a disastrous format, and they did all of this work with so much corporate BS over their heads. The amount of drama the Overwatch League has had over time, the amount of people speaking out about how badly ran it was, how many problems it faced. I guess they suck it up, they get through all of this. Their reward is either being dismissed or, being offered positions as contractors. So they're either gone or they're just not valuable enough to be kept around as full-time employees. This has happened seemingly with casters Bryce and Chris Tunn, who were both told in December that they would not be in the main roster for casting that season of the CDL. Instead, they are contracted for a selection of shows and seemingly are able to do other work. So there you go. Less commitment, more cost controlled. They're moving it over to Faceit, and they are just gutting internal teams. Activision is suffering. Blizzard is suffering. Do you know who's not suffering? Microsoft. They just had their most recent quarterly earnings report, and it's the first one that Activision-Blizzard will actually have an impact in. And actually turns out that ActiBlizz was more valuable than Microsoft initially suggested. As spotted by Maruno NL, the total price ended up being $75.4 billion when all accounting was finalized, an increase of about $6 billion on the initial price. So what that mostly means is that the impact of ActiBlizz on their finances was going to be a mixed thing. And that's maybe why they would want to prepare their investors by showing, look at this great asset, look at all of its amazing potential, and look how we've just tightened its belt. There are great things, right? So here's the business highlights. Xbox content and services revenue increased 61%, driven by 55 points of net impact from the Activision acquisition. That's pretty damn major. The overall impacts are framed around like this. Gaming revenue grew 49%, with 44 points being from the acquisition. Wow, the vast majority of that growth is this acquisition. I mean, hey, as that guy said on his last Slack message, at least we delivered shareholder value. He only bloody well did, didn't he? Overall then, their gaming revenue was $7.1 billion, and broadly looking at those numbers, Xbox was still growing. It was just really, it wasn't growing fast, right? That certainly was the case. So when these layoffs were announced, the one thing that we suspected is that these are being done to basically show to shareholders, etc., nope, we are being responsible with our money. We are cutting costs, blah, 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 blah. We then see this, the net impact from the Activision acquisition. And it does turn out that I think our analysis was right there. We see, their operating income is in fact a loss of $0.44 billion. Yes, a net impact from this acquisition. So to some investors, it may look like, cool, you've increased your expenses and, there's a loss here. So they'll just want to look like they're cutting those costs. That's why they felt comfortable doing the layoffs. Of course, there's a long-term belief here that, this is going to be an extremely, good deal, that it will be good for them. But, short-term concerns always do exist when we're dealing with this kind of cycle. And certainly if you look at Microsoft, it does appear they've been, some would say, quite disciplined in growing their, growing their margin over the last year, just from even looking at the basic numbers of their quarterly reports. Next then, want to talk about a little bit of impact here. Where does Microsoft actually stand after the first quarter with Activision under its belt? Let's go through the list. First, did Activision being around for Christmas mean that Microsoft surged on consoles? The answer is nope. They had a 1% growth year on year, in a year, of course, where stock is now plentiful and discounts were heavily applied across consoles, which does mean that just not much of a change here. I think the analysis here is simple, right? Xbox consoles are actually, this is shocking, the Xbox Series consoles are behind the Xbox One in lifetime growth. Just looking at this, right? Total Xbox revenues, 7.1 billion. Xbox content and services, 5.5 billion. Xbox hardware, 1.4 billion. This analyst's estimate here is hardware sales of about 4 million, which would mean 29.7 million life to date, which does mean that the Xbox Series is about 2 million behind the Xbox One, at least in the analysis of this individual. I thought that was a great post. Fascinating. Now, this is something that Satya Nadella then actually did follow up. Of course, you'll know Phil Spencer. Satya, though, is the CEO of the overall group. So in his follow-up points on the conference call, they said that they expect hardware revenue to decline year over year. Now, remember here, 2024 is the year when the FTC leaks, or at least pointing towards a disk driveless version of the Series X that's coming out. So that is something that's not expected to move the needle. And basically, we know this. That's why Xbox have been almost bullish about losing the console war. They know. So now they're trying to win more of a platform war. And I mean, hell, they even got a fairly large win in the EU. I believe the way that things are changing should mean that we can just more easily access stuff in the App Store. So that'll be kind of interesting for streaming. But basically, that's kind of their whole thing, right? Getting Xbox, games and services onto other platforms. Of course, Phil Spencer, they all called out mobile as one of their major motivators in even doing this acquisition. Now, what's not shocking is a massive surge in monthly active users. Satya said that skyrocketed to over 200 million. What's clear to me, though, is they must have a very different approach to measuring that number. Looking at past financial reports from Activision, you can see that their total MAUs are in and around, in all of these, they're above 350 million. So if Microsoft is saying over 200 million, no, that doesn't mean that Activision-Blizzard magically imploded and, layoffs, but it's not like their users all ran away and nobody noticed. I think this is just different ways of counting them. As an example, right, if you play Diablo 4, Diablo 2, World of Warcraft, and Hearthstone, you'll count as 4 MAUs, to Blizzard. And that's one of the reasons why you do get those very large numbers. I don't know. How do Microsoft do this differently? Would they, because I'm one account, maybe if I'm playing something on my Xbox, which is in my Microsoft account, I count as an MAU, and then maybe just me using a BNet game counts as 1 MAU. I do not know, but they certainly have a different way of counting it. Now, this quarter, they're predicting revenue growth in the low 40s for gaming overall, while Xbox content and services will grow by about 50% in revenue growth, which is certainly going to be quite nice. In both cases, this is almost entirely because of Activision-Blizzard. Xbox has currently got no new titles scheduled before April. This basically is a quarter where ActiBliz will be setting a new baseline performance at the company, presumably then because they no longer have the significant operating expenses in the form of laying off all of those staff, because laying staff off is expensive. Yeah, there we go, man. So I think just that way that, leadership were given lists and just, bam, people are gone. And just imagine, you fire some buckshot. This is an analogy I use in the WoW channel. Fire some buckshot onto, onto a massive interactive whiteboard that's just a spreadsheet of your staff. Whoever the buckshot lands on gets fired. Which is to say, from what I understand, leaders were not consulted in the downsizing of their teams. And that will mean that rather than do this with a scalpel so as to minimize damage to the patient, it was more rather done with a blunderbuss, which does kind of show that these layoffs, they were done quite hastily. They were done quite brutally. Often you can do things fast or you can do them well. They clearly chose fast. And I am certainly worried for the impact that this will have had on their teams, including teams that have had losses like Overwatch 2, and teams that didn't seemingly have as many, but of course will, I think, just have a higher propensity now for burnout, less satisfaction at work, etc., because nobody does great work with this kind of thing over their head. And then when they hear reports of how, like, you know, these Overwatch people and even the Call of Duty people, you know, they casted a whole tournament and then were told off, that is not going to instill any form of trust. And with the word in the street basically just being that Microsoft are brutally trying to cut costs, you can win by the balance sheet right now, but what cost will that have in the future? The answer is you're never going to know because you did that cut. So you don't know what the other timeline looks like. You know, the immediate balance sheet impact, you can quantify that. But any negatives that you know, brings into the long term because you've degraded the strength of your teams, you'll never know what would have happened if you didn't cut them. So I guess they won't feel bad. Ugh, sucks. But okay, I felt it was important. I know that this is like, not good news, and there's been a lot of bad news in the channel. But look, I do think this kind of thing is important. If you watch the Call of Duty League, I think it's important you know that the casters were put in that position, because we should actually know how things are being made. We shouldn't just be blind consumers. And to be honest, I think we get a lot more out of our hobbies when we have more understanding of what actually is going on. So anyway, that's it for me. Of course, if you want to support the work that my team is doing, I mean, seriously, they have been doing absolutely amazingly. Like on both of our channels, on news, it's been a hell of a first month, back in the year, and yeah, the guys have just been doing absolutely amazing. If you want to support them, support what we're doing, you can check out bellular.ghost.io and the link down below. That's it from me. I'll see you tomorrow.